once you've got the rear compartment propped up like that, it's pretty simple just to move the roof to where you want it. So you're just going to lift it up from here, and it's just going to feed all the way up. Once you do this a couple of times, it'll actually do it much simpler, as it moves all the hydraulic oil out of the lines themselves. From here, you can, if you try and lift up the tension bow, it's actually pretty hard. So the best way to do that is actually lift it a little bit, because there's a big lot of connections. Actually, when you pull down here, it actually also pulls down on the tension bow, which actually locks everything down. So to actually lift the tension bow, just lift up a bit at the front, and then that will loosen everything up. And then, once you've got it to there, you can easily lift the tension bow up. From there, what you're better off to do is actually have like I've just got a little thing that sits underneath here, inside here, just to hold that up if you actually want to do some work. If you need to lower it down, do not try and lower it down with the tension bow up like this. You know, there's a piece of the main pillar here which will actually hit the panel on the other side, or on both sides, if you lift it up. So make sure that if you're going to put the roof down into the convertible compartment, you allow that to lower first. Okay, let it fully do that, and then just lift from the front and move it all the way down. Okay, and then if you need to obviously move it back up again, you can just grab hold of it and move it all the way out. If you need to work on it where you need to remove the cover from bow 1, which is up here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move it to a position about there, so it's vertical, and I'm just going to keep it there. Because once that's vertical, it's very easy. This thing will just sit here like that. You're going to move all the screws and everything off here, which is actually a pretty simple process. And then once you've done that, then that whole thing will just pop straight off. One of the places, or one of the things that fails regularly on these roofs is this wiring harness down here, and it runs all the way through the main pillar down here, which is the C pillar, all the way along here, and there's this bend right there, and because as the roof goes back and forth, it gets straight and bent all the time, and eventually you get some breaks. There are 6 wires in there, 2 for the motor, and the motor's up in here, which actually make the locks move back and forth. They generally don't break, but there are 2 sensors up in here, which we'll have a look at in a moment, and they tell the convertible module if the locks are either open or closed, and they're very fine wires, and they eventually break. And those breaks are either normally down in here, or there's another bend down the bottom, which we'll have a look at in a moment, and you need to fix those up. One of the problems with that is that, as you can see, there's not a whole lot of room to move here. You don't want to make these thicker or bulk them up with solder or with shrink wrap or anything like that, because it's going to make it hard to have this fold correctly later on. Also, the wire that's in there is clearly something designed to be folded back and forth over and over again and not do any damage or not break quickly. So there are a couple of different ways to fix this problem. It's either come in here, cut into this nylon protective coating here, find the actual brake and then solder a piece that's in there. The problem is that that's actually fairly difficult, because you've got to somehow find some room to move, and there's not a whole lot, and you don't want to do a bad job and make it really thick. Also, you need to find really good quality wire that's going to work for you. So what I've found in the past is probably a better way of doing it, is I'm actually going to remove the entire loom and the harness out of here, so it's all clear. I'm going to find the brake, and probably what I would do is replace a piece of all those 4 wires, and just say there was a brake in there, I'm going to cut about there and there, okay? And then what I'm going to do is slide the wires down, so now this piece connects to here, so I have the wire that was previously here is now at the bend, and this has never been bent, so that's all fine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to solder in a piece somewhere else where it never gets bent. And the way I did that was actually put that up in here, because there's lots of wire in here which is just dead straight, and you can put any sort of wire in there. There's no problems with how much room there is, etc. So it's pretty simple to put that extra piece in there. And if you end up with another brake, then you just cut it again and keep on moving it down. And you can do the same for the bit that's down the bottom as well. Another place where you can get breaks of the harness is down in underneath here. The wiring harness actually runs down the C pillar, which is this whopping great big one here, which is the main pillar, which is connected to the main jack. And it goes behind this metal cover here that has a couple of things there. There's a wiring harness, and there's also a couple of hydraulic lines. Now, there's very little room to move in there. To actually get access to it, there are 4 screws. You can only see 3 of them here at the moment. They're little torque screws that you just pull out and the harness can come off. You'll have to actually put the roof in different positions, like lower the tension bow and lower most of the roof to get at all of them to get the cover off. And then once you've done that, you can access down the bottom there, which again, like the front, gets bent every time the roof opens and closes, and you could have a break there. Here's another look at where the harness is at the back of the roof. There's that metal cover that I was talking about. The harness runs behind that, as well as those 2 other hydraulic lines. And you can see down the bottom there, that's that harness just down there. Okay, so that actually runs from here and then back up behind all the workings back to the CVM. What happens is you can see that little corner of that metal cover is every time it bends, there's a fold where every time the roof goes up and down, that bit there gets bent back and forth, and you can sometimes end up with breaks there as well. If you need to fix a break that's in here, my suggestion is you actually cut through that nylon protective coating back here somewhere. So there's a bunch of clips along here, just disconnect those, cut through these with a pair of wire cutters. The problem is this stuff, it will start to unravel very, very rapidly, and it becomes a complete mess trying to control, and you'll end up cutting away a lot of this protective stuff as a result, just to try and clean everything up. My advice is, once you cut it, immediately just get your soldering iron and just like pull everything out and just touch on the ends of it to melt them so they all stick together on both ends, and then it'll stop fraying. And then once you've got that, you've got 2 decent bits of that covering there, and then what we'll do is I'm going to remove this entire piece when I actually remove the plugs and the pins from the front there, and then I can remove all of that off, and that's going to make it really simple to fix, make the fix up here somewhere. When you put this harness back in here, it's really critical that this length is exactly right. One of the reasons for that is that this piece here, that as it folds down, comes down, it's the piece that connects to the tension bolt at the back. It's got this bend in it here to go around the harness there, down in here. If this isn't correctly routed, so you've got a little bit extra or not enough, if it's not enough, it's going to stretch it, which is no good. If there's too much, it'll bow out, and this will act like a pair of scissors and try and cut it, and I've had problems with that before. Another one of the reasons why I like to actually remove the whole harness, fix it, and then put it back in there so it's exactly right before buttoning everything up. Here's another look at this join where this wire breaks. Just a couple of things you can see. I've actually got a zip tie in here, because what I found was this was actually bulging out quite a lot, and this was actually impinging on this bit here, and this was actually cutting it. So I actually drilled a small hole. If you remove the seal, you can actually get in here, drill a small hole, and I've actually put a zip tie there, and that holds it in a much better spot, so this actually can't push out and possibly get damaged by this arm as it comes down. With the piece here that actually connects to the locks on the windshield latch, to get at, or to actually remove this, so you can actually remove the locks, also to pull this sideways so you can get at the harness there and actually pull it clear, because there's very small gaps in here. You can't actually get the harness out without actually disconnecting it. It's pretty simple. It's just a little E-clip here. You can just pop that off. But the problem with it is that this piece of metal here actually stops that from coming off. The best way to release that and actually get it clear is to actually manually move the top lock, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. If you've got it in this position where it is at the moment, where the first part is sitting vertical, you can actually quite happily operate the locks manually, and it's not going to try and engage anything. So, and then it'll actually move this down to about here somewhere, and then it's actually much easier to pull off. I'm now going to manually activate these locks. I'm going to use a drill. I actually wouldn't suggest doing this, because if you overdo this, you put too much torque on the drill, you can actually strip the gears inside the motor sort of locking mechanism. Also, if you had this off and you were checking that everything worked okay, you can easily have this the roof in this sort of vertical position here and manually do this back and forth and see if the locks and everything are working correctly. Make sure you look at the guide here to see which direction needs to be turned so you don't go hard against the stops and possibly damage anything inside. So all I'm going to do is do this really slowly, and the first thing, it's going to be a bit hard to see it in the video, but the first thing that's going to happen is that this lock here is actually going to move up a little bit because the piston that runs down the side here that they were looking at before is now going to be pulled down. And then once it gets pulled down to its full extent, then the locks up here are going to activate. So that's fully unlocked there. Then start to lock it up. It's a bit hard to see, but these pistons are now actually starting to move. The locks here aren't yet, they haven't been activated yet. But now, the worm drive has gone through about half of its travel inside here, and this has now been fully pushed down, which is that bit that would actually pull the roof down to the windshield prior to latching. And now if you did it further, you keep on going, you would now see these locks activate on each side, which obviously locks it to the windshield. And then once it's all the way down, you can pull off that little end of the piston where the E-clip was, so you can disconnect that. Now with the locks activated, you can see this is now further rearward, and I can easily just pull that off. And what's really important to note here is that this here, you can rotate it quite happily, can you see that isn't symmetric? Okay, so you can see the gap in there is slightly larger than that there. It's very easy, you can just plonk it and do it the wrong way around. Okay, if you plonk it the wrong way around, this will actually start to impinge on the latching mechanism. So it's really important, okay, that the skinny bit, the one which does the smallest sort of gap in there, if you like, okay, is the one that goes against it, which actually puts the biggest gap on this side here and pushes it away from the latching mechanism. To remove the bow one cover, the first thing I'm going to do is disconnect the seals at the front. Easiest way I found to do that is on the inside there's a screw here and a screw there. From the inside they are an E-torque, so an E5, okay, and from the inside they're left-hand thread. So to loosen them, and I find it's the best way to actually tighten and loosen these right when you're fully installing, right at the end, or when at the start when you're uninstalling, is to actually use the E-torques, and to do that as far as you can. But then on the other side, it's a normal Torx connection which you're actually going to remove it from, because you can't actually completely remove it from this side. It's just, but I find it's actually much easier to use an E-torque from the inside initially. So we're just going to do that on all four of these, two on each side. To remove those screws completely on the seals, getting at the actual screws from the outside is a bit difficult because these seals are just so tight and you need to get access to underneath them. What I've done is I've just got a couple of bits of MDF here which are nice and smooth on the edges, so I can just jam them in there, one on either side of the screw that I'm going to remove, and it just makes it much easier to pull them out, but especially for install later on it makes it much simpler. So all I'm going to do is I've already loosened those from the inside. It's a T30. And then that's just a normal left-hand thread from the outside. Once you've got the seals disconnected on the side, we've got this sitting vertically, everything's just going to hang there like that. To actually remove the cover, there are a couple of things that we need to remove. So on each side, the liner is connected here, that's just by a normal Phillips head. Behind that there's a big flathead, sorry not flathead, but a big square flat washer, which you're going to look at, make sure this orientation of the way the liner folds here. Maybe take a photograph of it just so you know what you need to do when you put that back on. The next one, when you pull back the seal, you can see there's a small Torx screw, that's a T20, we're just going to remove that. And obviously it's the same on both sides. There's also a little rubber stop here, just get a pair of pliers and pull that off. And then underneath here is a 7mm, just normal nut, we're just going to remove that. There's one of those on both sides, and then there's loads of these little screws along the top here. The OEM screw is a 2.5mm Allen key. Unfortunately, I've had, when BMW worked on my car in the past, where they've cross-threaded and trashed some of those screws, so I've just replaced those with normal 4mm screws with a washer. That works perfectly fine if you need a replacement, if some of those are damaged. Just be a little bit careful. When you put those in, they don't need to be tight, so don't over-tighten those. It's easy to blur off the insides of those if you're not careful. So all you need to do is we're just going to remove all of those, and then the thing will just pop straight off. So once all of those screws are removed, all those around the perimeter, then we can just grab hold of the seal or the cover, and the seal is connected from one side to the other, and the whole thing just pulls straight off. So with the cover off, a couple of things about what you can see underneath it. So we've got the motor here. When the motor turns, it turns this mechanism in here, which then turn these, which have a screwdriver in here, which then moves this back or forth to actually open and close the locks, as well as pull down or extend. There's a sort of not a piston, but it's sort of a connector point here, which actually makes the roof move that last little bit so it can go down and unlatch, or to latch it correctly, or to open it up that first little bit. With the wiring harness, you can see the wiring harness running along here. So the way I would fix that bend that's down above that left-hand side first bend is, like I said, I would be making the cut back left, but then what I'm going to do is I am going to actually disconnect all the plugs in here. I'm actually going to pull all of the pins out of each of the plugs, and then I'm going to pull that harness. You can actually push it together and it sort of compresses and opens up, and then you can slide it all of the way off. And then once you've done that, then you can feed where you've got the harness all the way out, and once it's out then you've got all the individual wires, and it's much, much simpler to make the fix. Once you've actually made the fix, you can see that this is where I put in those extra pieces of wire. So instead of putting in extra pieces of soldered wire in here at the bend, what I'm going to do is push that down, make one solder down in that bend but reorder the actual bend, so you've got good new original wire in the actual bend, but then I'm going to make the wire the original length by putting in some more here. You can do as much as you want. You can actually put lots in here if you want to, because there's actually lots of fat. You can probably do the fix by cutting out 10 centimetres or so and not even put in an extra bit, because there's a big bend in here of extra wire. But you can quite happily put lots extra in here and extend this as much as you want. It's not particularly important how long it is. What is critical is the length of this wire in here and making sure this is routed correctly. One of the things about this is that when you pull out these plugs, there's the 4 wires that go to the black plug. They are for the sensors. There are 2 sensors at the front here, and there's a little magnetic piece in this plastic piece that has the worm drive for the left-hand latch. And the 2 sensors are actually, there's one there and there's one at the back there. So obviously this one here senses when it's unlocked, and the one over here senses when it's fully locked. And so there's a little magnetic or a metal piece in the actual plastic piece that's embedded in it. So as it moves to either side, it either activates or deactivates that particular hall sensor. To remove these wires or the pins from the plugs, the black one's relatively simple, and that's for those 4 wires that are for these sensors. That's one that connects to that, and that wire goes over to the sensors over near that left-hand latch. To remove those, at the back here there are just a couple of little sort of pieces that you just pull aside, and then this piece here will pull rearwards, and then what you'll have is just this centre piece, and you can see that white piece on the inside there. You're just going to pry that out, and then you have access to the pins. If you just use a little a poking tool, like a pin or something, you can push down on the barbs, which will then allow you to pull the pins out. Before you pull that apart though, take a photograph of it, digital photos, so you know where the wires go back in the correct spots. And or look up on the TIS for the wiring diagram to make sure it goes back to the correct pin position. The other one over here, this is for the motor. To pull those wires out, these are a bit of a pain. The pins here are one-way only, so they're really difficult to remove. the way I did this, and I made a bit of a mess of it to be perfectly honest, but it's actually not that hard. The first thing we need to do is a piece on the inside here, and the clips here, so you just get little baby screwdrivers in under there, and that centre piece there will pull rearwards and pop straight out. And then to actually get the actual pin out itself, you'll just need, there's a little, the barb is just in there, so you just need to get probably just a Dremel tool there and just cut into it just slightly. I made a bit of a mess of it because I didn't really know what was inside when I was pulling this apart for the first time. But if you just cut gently down each of these, and it'll open it up, you'll be able to pull those pins out, and then you'll be able to easily pull those out. Now, even though I've cut those in there, I cannot pull those out, so the only reason you sort of cut in there is just to open up a little bit and pull it back out, and then you'll easily be able to put them back in, and they'll never come back out again once you reinstall everything. When installing the Bow 1 cover, just plonk it on there, it'll just sit there and not fall off all by itself. Put in the two nuts at either end and tighten those to start off with, and then I would put in the Torx screws, and then the Phillips head, which actually holds the liner to the roof, and then from there you can move along the top and and put all the small screws around the edge of it. Once you've done that, put on the stoppers on the top of the nuts, and then after that we're going to connect these. When you're putting the seals on and connecting them from the outside, I'm going to use these little stoppers here to open the seal up so I can get access. Otherwise I found it's a real pain to try and get these things in. When you're actually, because you have to manhandle the seals a bit to actually get these things in, okay, don't just hold onto it like this. Hold it hard against the actual roof itself, because otherwise it's very easy to put a lot of pressure on the rubber up here and you might end up breaking the seal, which would be no good. So just hold it there, shove those things in, and then as I'm just going to pull it open a bit, I've got my screw and I've got it on a magnetic tool, because these getting them in can be a bit of a pain, and I'm just going to plonk that in there and just give it a couple of turns until it grabs and pull that out. And then once I've done that, I'm just going to get my Torx 30 and then just put all the way in until it grabs, and then just back it off a little bit because I want to have that movement in there. And I'm going to put the other one in, and then once I've got both of those in, I'm actually going to close the roof completely, and the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the seals, and I'll show you how to do that. To adjust the seals, we need to have these loose to start off with, and I'm going to lower and lock the roof completely. And what we're trying to do is align these correctly. I've actually got my the E5 Torx already connected on the inside here, ready to go. And what I'm going to do is align this correctly and then tighten it from the inside. Remembering from the inside it's a left-hand thread, so we're going to turn it clockwise to tighten it. So there are a couple of things I want to do. At the start, at the front here, there's this seal which is along the A-pillar. What I want to do is adjust that so it's pushing down just a little bit into this seal. If I push it down too far, it'll bulge. If it's up not far enough, it'll actually leak in here. So it just needs to be a little bit there. Okay, I'm just going to tighten that. Sorry, I was incorrect. It's actually anti-clockwise from the inside. So I'm just going to give that a bit of a tweak so this front end can't actually move. When you're aligning the rear seal, what you're trying to do is move this up and down and get it so this top bit here is aligned correctly with that centre seal, which is this one here. Don't worry about what's at the bottom. It's actually this bottom top up here, which is really important to make sure that it is lined up as accurately as you possibly can, and then you can tighten it from the inside. And once you've tightened that rear one, then you can go back and just tweak the rear one, the front one, and make sure that everything is nice and tight. It doesn't have to be super tight. I've heard people having where they've actually gone to undo them and they're just super tight and they're just about seized. They just need to be tweaked so they sit there nicely.